Welcome back. I'm doing a video today here talking about security features in Zoom. So I'm recording this in January of 2021. We've been almost 1 year into the pandemic here at Lake Tahoe Community College. Come March is really the unfortunate anniversary of when we started to move things virtually. Since that time, Zoom has really responded, I think, quite effectively in terms of creating new security features that give you more power as a host or co-host of one of your meetings. One of the worst things that can ever happen, and happened to me almost a year ago when I first started doing this and there weren't these security features available, is I experienced a Zoom bombing incident. And if you experience one of these incidents, it's really unfortunate. It's you feel kind of violated. It's offensive what people can do to you in the various modalities of Zoom, including drawing on the screen, obscene things with profile pictures or video, or even in the chat room. Well, the good news is Zoom has responded, and as I walk you through the security features in Zoom, you see you have the ability really with one click, depending on what you want to do, either prior to your meeting or during your meeting, immediately eliminate any of that offensive behavior. So in the video today, I'll walk you through the features that you might look at in terms of your settings, and then we'll also look at a sample meeting in terms of what happens and how you can take better control of that meeting to make sure that you don't have anyone doing anything offensive or inappropriate in your meeting. So let's take a look now at the security features here in Zoom as of January 2021. Okay, so let's take a look now at a variety of options that you can use to better secure your meetings either before or during a meeting. In the year or so that I've been using Zoom through my institution of higher learning where I work, I would say that the Zoom features have gotten a lot better. I think over time Zoom has figured out that Zoom bombing can be a threat and they have to deal with security options better. And I think they've done a good job of that. So there are really like three areas that I would suggest that you might think about security in addressing Zoom meetings, seminars that you might be running, classes, and so forth. So the first of these relates to security settings at the level of your web Zoom client. And just as a reminder, if you go to your app version of Zoom here and you click on preferences, this may vary based on Mac or PC. The settings here are really, I would say, related to technology such as background noise suppression, or if I want to change my video during a meeting, I can move from my FaceTime camera to my USB camera. So this is really for your technological settings during a meeting. Now, the settings found on the web version of Zoom are really going to be the ones you want here in terms of dealing with security issues. So to get started on this, go to your web client, make sure you're logged in, and then click on the Settings tab. The first thing that will show up will be the security settings. These are the first few items that you see on this list. And this has been expanded considerably over the last year or so that I've been using Zoom. So again, kudos to Zoom for doing this. And we can just take a look and go through a few of these. So at the very top, if you require that all meetings are secured with one security option, either you'd have to have a passcode, waiting room, or only authenticated users can join meeting. If no security option is enabled, Zoom will secure all meetings with waiting room. If you ever want to know more about these settings, click on the Learn More button, and this will take you to the overview of Zoom security settings, whatever it is that you happen to be looking at, and so forth. Very handy to be able to do that. So I personally always use a waiting room. And this requires then that if people are joining a meeting, they first go in that waiting room, just like a doctor's office. And then if you look at their name and they seem legit, if you recognize that name, you then can accept them one at a time, or you can accept them as an entire group. What I always do is if I don't recognize the name of being someone from my institution, I go to my Outlook, and if I see a name in there, because hundreds of people work at the college that I work at, I will type in that person's first or last name. If Outlook doesn't come up with a hit for me and I still don't know who that is, I will then send a message in the waiting room and say, please authenticate who you are. Do you work at Lake Tahoe Community College? If they don't do that, I just basically hit reject and don't let them into the meeting. So those pre-steps that you can do prior to a meeting starting are really golden in terms of allowing you to control access to that meeting to make it more secure. So I totally recommend the meeting room as your number one option, in my opinion, of making sure you have good security in a meeting. You can also look at having a passcode for a meeting if you like. I don't personally like the passcode. I've had mixed results using it. Just sometimes people would be asked for the passcode, other times people wouldn't. So I personally don't like the passcode as much as I do the waiting room because it's a more obvious level of security I can look at, assess who's there, let them in if I want, ask them more questions by sending that message to waiting room option to any of the people in the waiting room. You cannot, in some cases, click these if your administrator has set them as a default being. In this case, you cannot have only authenticated users joining a meeting. So if that's the case, just go with what security settings are left to you as a user. You can also, if you want to specifically block people from a particular region of the world, you could do that. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe if you're worried about someone hacking from a particular country, if that's the case, you could find a region. Once you do that, hit save. And just to be clear on this, if you choose the top, it's only allowed from the selected countries, or if you change it to block users, and I do the same thing, then anyone from Canada would be blocked. I want to make sure I just go through and default change this. Otherwise, if I started a meeting, unless they're from Canada, if that's the option I selected, they couldn't join that meeting. Haven't used that yet, but I'd be curious to hear what your uses are for that. And now I'm going to hit reset. You can always do this. If you hit reset on this, it'll go back to whatever settings were the default settings there. So level 1 of security is making sure that you really secure your meeting prior to it starting. Again, I really recommend a default for you being the waiting room. I should also say that you might also want to, ahead of time, disable any features that you're concerned about that could also be prone to Zoom bombing. As an example, if I type in annotate, right here, allow hosts and participants to use annotation tools. I can click on whether or not I want the user who's sharing to annotate and whether or not things are going to be saved in terms of annotations. Same thing with the whiteboard. I mention this because if someone took control of your meeting and tried to post inappropriate things, they would typically do that by shouting or screaming with the audio feature, video, any photos or screen share, including profile picture. The profile picture, they could share an inappropriate photo, and then the whiteboard and the annotation could also be hijacked. You just want to think about this, that something like remote control, maybe you wouldn't want some of these options set if you really want to harden your meeting in terms of your participants. So what I would suggest here is on a feature by feature basis, go through your settings and select any of the others and adjust as appropriate to your own security preferences. But definitely start at the top of the page, look at security here, and make sure you have those pre-settings. Now, the second thing to talk about is you really want to make sure that if you're setting up meetings, you don't share that very specific URL that you want your authenticated or legit users to click on to join your meeting, particularly if this is not a one-time meeting. If you're doing a recurring meeting when you set up a meeting in Zoom and you share that unique address to join across social media, such as on Twitter, which is what I did back almost a year ago when I had about 10, 15 Zoom bombers in a session, I mistakenly sent that out over Twitter, and people were just sort of trolling and found it, joined, and tried to do an attack on the meeting and so forth, and invaded the meeting. So the best bet then with the second tip is to make sure that anything like your unique personal meeting ID, which fortunately Zoom has now blurred out on this screen in case you ever share this, you don't want this being shared with the outside world. It's a specific identifier. You likely wouldn't be able to change that. As a result of that, this would be potentially compromised if someone happened to get a hold of it. If you ever do like screenshots or videos, tutorials on Zoom, and you're showing that unique personal meeting ID or any of the unique meeting IDs that you'll find, particularly for recurring meetings under your meetings tab, be sure to redact that some way in post-production of your video or of your image share that you might be sending out over social media. Again, if people get hold of that, they could take advantage of it for nefarious purposes, join your meeting, and create a security situation for you. So tip 2 is to really secure your unique URL or web address that is used by your participants to legitimately join a meeting that you're hosting. And then our final example here to look at, or area, we'll actually start a meeting here. And this is direct in-meeting. Start my video here. This is direct in-meeting controls to deal with security. So this is the situation where you've done everything I've suggested. You've adjusted your security settings on your web client of Zoom to make sure you have, for example, waiting room or a password or other features disabled or enabled to protect your meeting. You've made sure that you haven't shared your unique Zoom address with the outside world, particularly over social media. But then you get to your meeting and still some people get through. So what can you do during the meeting itself? Well, fortunately, Zoom has for us this really handy security tab. You find it as a host at the bottom of that screen right after your video tab and audio tab. You click on that and a series of choices will come up. If it is enabled, it has a check by it. So if I didn't have a waiting room already, I could enable that. If I wanted to immediately lock the meeting, no one else can join that meeting. So if you discovered that all of a sudden people were infiltrating that meeting, by locking it, you would prevent additional people from joining. Again, any of these that I want to change, I want to make sure that I have my waiting room enabled. This is also good if you forgot to do this in your settings on Zoom right when that meeting starts, or you start your meeting and people are just about to join. Make sure that you control the options here that you want. Profile pictures can be hidden if you want, and then allowing participants to do various things: share screen, chat, rename themselves, unmute themselves, and start a video. So all those give you additional layers of security that you can take advantage of through technology during the meeting itself. And then if everything else fails, if you had a total assault on your meeting by Zoom bombers, you click this particular red option here, suspend participant activities. And it's asking me here, suspend participant activities. Everyone's video and audio will be turned off, screen sharing will be stopped, chat will be disabled, and the meeting will be locked. If ever I want information about these, just click on Learn More, and this will detail the in-meeting security options of Zoom. So very handy. Just click on the version that you're doing, whether it's web-based, iPad, Android, Windows, etc. So if I don't want this to happen, I'll hit cancel. And by the way, this report to Zoom is actually fairly handy, because what that means is Zoom will actually get a list of potential violators who have tried to take over your meeting. When I had my one Zoom bomb incident some time back, I was sure that I sent a report. It took Zoom a while to get back to me, but they did. It's just like on social media. In these times of QAnon and conspiracy theories and a lot of aggressive discourse on social media, you can always, just like on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, report someone for inappropriate behavior, activity, language, whatever. Likely not going to do that in most cases, but if you did happen to suspend a meeting, make sure you click that if you want to report the participant activities that are inappropriate to Zoom. In this case, I would hit cancel since I don't want to do that. So again, a lot of options too, but I really love the fact that Zoom has provided this additional layer of security that is an in-meeting layer of security using the various technologies of the features in Zoom that you can enable or disable. I really think now, since we've been at my institution using Zoom for almost a year, I've heard very little, if any, cases of Zoom bombing. I think Zoom has done a better job in terms of assuring that our security is safe in a meeting, both doing that through the settings as well as reminding us not to share our unique meeting addresses with the outside world and social media. And then secondly, within meetings themselves, where we just have to click on the security tab and we have a lot of control to make our meetings safer. A final thing I would suggest to you is that if you're holding a big meeting and it's not a webinar, and some of us don't have the options personally to host webinars, webinars are much more secure because typically no one can do anything. They just watch the screen, and that's their level of participation, so no Zoom bombing is possible. So if you are hosting a meeting and you have a co-host, the co-host, and I served in this role a couple days ago, so I'll show you an example of it. The co-host could be responsible for doing all the security stuff while the main host is leading the meeting, checking chat, talking through stuff, sharing their PowerPoint. So here's an example of what you'll see during a meeting. So as someone joins, again, I have access to the security panel. The thing you didn't see just now, because we're not in a live meeting, it's just me, you see one additional option under Suspend Participant Activity, and that specifically is Remove Participant. So all you need to do, again, pull up that same tab on Security, click Remove Participant, and then this will pop up. It will then specifically allow you to put people in this area where then you could choose to remove them from the meeting. So that's another way, really a fourth layer, if you will, of security that Zoom has set up that really allows you to better control who has access to your meeting. If someone escapes through all the security levels, you can always, as a co-host during a meeting, being almost the security agent, if you will, make sure that people who might be inappropriate immediately are either put in the waiting room or removed from the meeting completely. So I hope that helps today in terms of giving you some of the various security features that you can take advantage of before or after a meeting. Okay, well, that's going to do it today. I hope you enjoyed this focus today here, looking at some of the new and I think super useful features in terms of security in your Zoom session. Please watch additional videos that I'll be featuring here on Zoom and other forms of educational learning technology. And good luck in everything that you do in terms of your teaching or your work within Zoom teleconferencing.